Ambassador, President Trump is slated, as you know, to meet with President Putin less than a couple of weeks from now. And there are these reports from the Kremlin that if both sides agree, the two leaders could meet privately, no aides. Just assess that for us.
I think it's a bad idea for America for a couple of reasons. Number one, Vladimir Putin, President Putin, has been at this for 20 years. This is now his president that he's had these bilateral meetings with. He knows all these issues cold. I sat in a half a dozen meetings with him when I was in the government, whereas President Trump does not know these issues cold. He doesn't know the history, and that just puts the advantage to President Putin. Number two, you need a note taker in those meetings. We need to know what happened. I was in every meeting that President Obama had with Russian presidents because we wanted somebody to be recording things in case there was a disagreement. And even in the Obama days, there were disagreements about what happened in those meetings. So I think it's a bad idea. It gives advantage to Putin and disadvantage to Trump.
Yeah, I want you to expand a little bit on that experience that he has. And he's also, will remind folks, a former KGB officer. How does he go into those meetings? Give us a little bit of a psychological profile.
Well, first, like I said, he's been at this for 2 decades. And in the KGB, because they dealt with national security issues too, he's been at this forever. President Trump did a lot of other things in his career, but he didn't work on national security issues. Number two, President Putin comes very prepared for these meetings. He spends a lot of time preparing, and he goes in trying to achieve Russian national interest as defined by him. And what's striking from President Trump, at least rhetorically so far, is he just sees the meeting as the outcome that he wants. He just wants a good meeting. What the actual issues that he wants to advance are very unclear. And to the extent that he's hinted at any, they're all concessions to Russia, right? He said he would look into recognizing Crimea as part of Russia, an outrageous thing to say. He's talked about reducing our military in Europe, in Germany. These are all things that are concessions to President Putin. Leaving Syria, that's a third thing he's floated recently. All concessions to Putin in exchange for what? I don't know what that what is.
And all things, Victor Cha, that make the people who are going to be with the president before he goes to Helsinki nervous because he has the NATO meeting. The last NATO meeting, we'll just say in an understatement, didn't go well, at least from the perspective of the other countries that were there. Give us again the lay of the land. And is there anything that you see happening in that NATO meeting that could impact the way the president approaches his meeting with Vladimir Putin?
Well, you would want to use a meeting like NATO to get NATO allies behind you for whatever agenda you want to pursue. I mean, it's a great platform. But as we've seen with the G7, other previous NATO meetings, the president used these things to really stick it in the eye of the allies, to tell Germany and others you're not paying enough, you're not spending enough on defense spending. So there are opportunities to use these meetings to advance an agenda, as Michael just described, but it's not clear that this president's going to do
What's
that.
the worst case scenario for folks at NATO? That he leaves early, that he doesn't show up for meetings the way he did at the G7, that the clear message is sent to Putin? We don't have any kind of unanimity here?
Sure. I mean, I think and we've seen him do this at the G7, he misses meetings or he deliberately goes after particular NATO countries and says, you need to do this more, you need to do that more. And this creates a lot of dissension, not just among NATO countries, but when we're talking about China or Russia, they're looking at this dissension in the Western Bloc and they're seeing it as all playing to their advantage.
Who do you see in the administration, Ambassador, who could have some influence on all of this that would be something that would ease fears of people like yourself?
That's a good question. I mean, actually, many people in the Trump administration, I think, have the right instincts towards Russia. And the Trump administration's policy. Sorry?
Just not the influence.
Yeah, well, the policy so far, and you saw this weird tip with Mr. Bolton last weekend, the policy so far is pretty good. The policy so far is not to recognize Crimea, to keep the sanctions in place, to support NATO, but the president doesn't seem to agree with it. And as he becomes more comfortable in being president, he's going in his own way against the interests of the administration, and I would say the United States of America.
Ambassador Michael McFaul and Victor Cha, happy 4th of July, and thank